So this is a special seminar that I'm giving right now. And I call it a seminar because what I'm going to talk about, I was going to do it in car videos, and we'll see. Maybe there will be follow-up videos. I might not be able to cover it all in one video, but this lends itself to a more formal setting, you could say, than a car in a way, what I'm going to talk about, because the subject matter is without question what you would consider advanced in the manifesting community space, the law of assumption, law of attraction space. What I'm going to talk about, frankly, here and openly is stuff that most teachers will not go near. And I just didn't feel like doing that in the car to start with. What I'm about to share is going to really trigger some of you, make some of you probably never watch my stuff again. And it's also, I think, we'll see how it goes, but some of the more valuable information that I've shared on this channel, at least recently. I think why, if you're drawn to my videos, one of the reasons is because of the realness of them. You can see the authenticity of what I'm talking about. And I really don't like talking about, my personal experiences, my personal life in terms of this stuff all that much. I think when it becomes too self-involved in that way, when you're talking about your experiences video after video, the message of a lot of these great, manifesting and spiritual concepts is kind of lost in translation. So even though I do regularly give examples of like what's going on in my life or what has happened to me before, I'm very intentional with how I share that stuff usually. Joel Goldsmith, who maybe we'll talk about later in this seminar, he's got a great chapter in my favorite book of his, Invisible Supply, where he's just talking about secrecy and how important secrecy is when it comes to applying these various concepts. And I've been a big believer in that for a while, but even more so as the years have gone on. So yeah, I'm always hesitant to really share that much. Also, my wife is much more private than I am. And that I like to respect her boundaries, respect my family's boundaries, because my boundaries are a little bit different. I'm very loose and informal, and I say all that because I'm going to just share some personal stuff to illustrate some very important points that you basically never hear when people talk about these concepts. Earlier this year, I think it was, I made a video talking about my experiences after 10 years of being into basically like law of assumption concepts. It was about 10 years ago, a little bit more now, that I discovered Neville. And I'll put a link above to that video I did talking about how since discovering, I first discovered Wallace Wattles, and then a few months after that discovered Neville. Since discovering those guys, how much my life has changed, for both good and bad, but mainly good. I'm very, very grateful to have discovered these new thought teachers. And it's really changed my life. But unlike a lot of people, and again, I really suggest looking at that video before you watch the rest of this video. But unlike a lot of people, I was way into spirituality before I ever discovered Neville or all these great practical sounding law of attraction type of teachers. So for me, the draw of the law of assumption or law of attraction or whatever you want to call it, because for me, the terminology is there's no difference in reality, in my opinion. It's all the same thing, basically. All these manifesting teachers are basically pointing at the same thing. For me, the draw of it is practically helping to improve my life and the lives of those around me. A more practical way to do it that fits more with my skills, right? Because my backstory is like, I never wanted to do much in many ways. I've always been I've always had a very artistic temperament. I've always kind of liked having time alone, having a lot of downtime. Before I ever found these ideas, I very intentionally, worked at a job renting apartments for about 10 years where I made my own schedule. I was self-employed, or I have been self-employed at this point for pretty much 20 years. Since the time I was about 23, 24 years old, I've been self-employed. The idea of having a 9-to-5 job or having that kind of structure never was something that I really wanted to even consider seriously. So I say that because I think a lot of people get into these concepts for the same reason. They might have kind of an artistic, you could say sensibility, a poetic sensibility, right? A spiritual sensibility, where they don't gain a lot of satisfaction from what some people might in terms of traditional avenues for work, right? Like I knew I was never going to be a banker or a business person, for instance, right? And, I consider being a teacher because I love kids and I like teaching, but like the idea of like working in like, public schools was something that I realized very early in my 20s that like, I could never do that. I was too sensitive and too contrarian to ever do anything like that. And then later in my 20s, I realized not only that, I don't think I could work in a school, period. And yeah, like just how things were set up as a group collective, while I often saw the value of the group collective and the point of having things in a certain systematic way, it was something I never really wanted to partake in. I always just like, I had that artistic sensibility. Like I wanted to have my space and my time. And I was fortunate in that as my 20s progressed, when I was doing real estate, renting apartments, I got into more practical self-improvement, because before that, since I was a teenager, I was into, the mystical spirituality, the Zen stuff, the Buddhism stuff. But I got into like more practical self-improvement, stuff like Tony Robbins and, books on, communicating better. And, that stuff all helped me. And eventually it led me through, the bridge of incidences to finding, Wallace Wattles and then Neville. And that was when I discovered that was pretty much the end of me having any type of a normal job. Not that my job was all that normal. I rented apartments and had a very flexible environment. And so in 2014, when I discovered Neville, I rather quickly was able to transition to self-publishing stuff, writing stuff on Amazon under pen names, and then eventually, doing some stuff in my own name, and making money that way, and no longer having to really do real estate. And so that's something I think a lot of people aspire to, is to be able to do something where you're not working 9-to-5, where you don't have set hours, or you don't have a boss. And ideally to do something you kind of like doing and not to have a boss or a schedule. And finding Neville crystallized that application of how to do that for me. And, not just in like a theoretical way, but like in a literal way too, where I was like, oh, wow, Neville's ideas, these concepts should be shared more openly. So besides just like the stuff I was putting under pen names on Amazon, which were like, basically like alternative health books, not very interesting stuff to me now at all, which is why I never put my name on them. Besides that stuff, I published a few, edited and put together a few collections of Neville's work. The most prominent, which many of you have probably read, is Manifesting Miracles, which is a very short collection of some of Neville's teachings. That was the first book of Neville's that I put out there on Amazon. That was like 10 years ago. And then I followed up because I got into it because I was so into Neville's teachings and learning about them. I did a bunch of other books, and someone said, why don't you write some commentary about it? And I didn't really want to, but they convinced me to. And so that's how Relax More, Try Less, and then Mindful Manifestation and Manifestation Through Relaxation came about, all at that time. And I've spoken about this in other videos, and I've written about it a little bit. But for me, what happened, within a few years of finding out about the law of assumption, is that most people in my life, unless you were like family members or close friends, they thought I was still doing real estate, but the reality was I was just making all my money basically passively. I really wasn't counseling because I was already into like alternative stress management counseling, the somatic movement stuff, but I wasn't really making much money from that. And I wasn't coaching people about these LOA ideas yet at all, really. I was just emailing some people about them. But anyway, I was making money passively, thousands of dollars a month. And I no longer needed to do the real estate thing. So for years, I just basically had a life where, I didn't have to worry about my income because it was passively coming in. And I relaxed into that. Neville and some of these other great teachers taught me how to do that really well. And I enjoyed a lot of my work. I enjoyed, editing Neville's stuff and writing about these various new thought ideas. And then when I discovered Coué, I enjoyed editing and talking, writing some about Coué's ideas. So I worked some, but I never really had to work more than 10, 15 hours a week unless I wanted to. And there were many months where I would work 10, 20 hours a month, and I would make $4,000 or $5,000, and my wife was self-employed at the time. My wife's a therapist. She also was able to work a small amount of hours, 20 hours a week or something like that. And we did this for years. We had a very low-key lifestyle in terms of work, in terms of having a lot of time to just kind of be, right? To take trips if we wanted to go on vacations. And that honestly is where I think a lot of people want to get to. They get into these ideas, especially if you're younger, if like you're in your 20s or something like that. What I just described, you're like probably like, whoa. But for me, one of the things that's interesting is that's like kind of just a starting point of my manifesting journey, if you want to talk about that. Talk about it in those terms. Because what happened, one of the things I always wanted to figure out how to do is not just how to, manifest money passively, but I talked about this thing in the Relaxation Manifesto, a short guide I did years ago, but like how to make money, like out of thin air, right? Manifest money out of thin air. I've always been interested in this idea because I never had an avenue to make money that I really liked, until I got into this book editing and publishing thing. I liked that. But, despite what I read and how I tried to apply it, I never could actually figure out how to make like a lot of income. For instance, in all those years from doing this, I never made more than 6 figures a year from book publishing. I made enough money for us to get by and not work a lot, which in my opinion is a hell of a lot better than making, a couple $100,000 a year and working 80 hours a week. But never figured out how to stack income. And I was fine with that, but I was also always curious. One reason I did that short Neville guide called the Wealth Mindset, which includes in it changing the feeling of I and sound investments. Those two brilliant lectures by Neville. One of the reasons I wanted to publish that book and make it so more people would read it and hear this advice is because the story of Jimmy Fuller, for instance, always really interested me. Jimmy Fuller talked about making money in the background. He was always in the background. I was like, that's a really interesting concept. And that's basically how I tried to apply manifesting advice, not just for money, but in general. It's like, can I manifest money? Can I manifest supply, money, enough money to live? And, manifest good health, manifest good relationships. Can I do that kind of in the background where people don't even know what I'm doing? People who haven't seen me, will, they don't know. Basically what happened is I ran into a roadblock. And the roadblock was my wife wanted to have a kid. And I was at first somewhat ambivalent about this. This is back in like 2016, 2017, this started. Not started, but like this idea became like this is going to happen. And basically like my wife was like, well, I want to have a kid. And I wasn't against having a kid. And it became very clear that like we had to make more money. And to make a long story short, I was never able to figure out how to make a lot more money using these manifesting tools as of yet, by applying them the way I knew how and was trying to learn how, in the way I would have liked. I consider that one of my quote unquote failures of applying this information. And as a lot of you know who watch this channel, your failures can become your successes, but sometimes they take time. And this subject, the subject of, generating ample supply, is something that I'm still working on, and I'm very open about the fact that I'm working on it. So yeah, what happened on a practical level is my wife left her part-time job and went back to not a full-time job at all, but close to a full-time job at MIT, where she was a therapist, kind of a high-paid, high-stress position where she was not working 40 hours a week. She was probably working closer to 30 hours a week, but it was a stressful position. And we had a kid, and it was great. It was well worth that trade-off. And I was still, writing and editing, and I got to be basically a stay-at-home dad with our first daughter, where, my wife in many ways was more of the breadwinner than I was in those first couple of years there. And that was an interesting experience and a very gratifying experience that I don't think a lot of fathers get to have. And I was still making a lot of money passively, by the way, just not as much as we wanted, which is a very important distinction. We had the money we needed, but not as much as we wanted. But what has happened since then is that this has been kind of a constant theme, this resistance that I've had to move through in my life. Because a few years after my wife, was working at MIT, it became very clear to both of us that she didn't want to do it long term, that she had experienced working in a much more gratifying part-time, choose your own clients type of manner before, and that she much preferred that, and that her work at MIT was much more stressful than she liked. And I realized too, as much as I loved being with our daughter, that there was a lot of creative stuff that I could do that I now felt like I couldn't necessarily present in books, but that I could present via coaching people, talking to people about these ideas. Because at this point, I've been into these ideas for like, 5, 6 years, and I had a very different viewpoint than most people did of them. This is around the time, it's like 2019, maybe, around then, 2020, maybe, around the time I published The Joy of Not Thinking. But yeah, my wife stuck it out. COVID happened. A bunch of crazy shit happened. COVID, I mean, most people are still not, in my opinion, people still have not processed the trauma of COVID. Like 2020 was crazy, right? For us, it went, on a personal level, for my family, it worked very well because my wife got to work from home, didn't really have to work nearly as much again. And yeah, I didn't work that much unless I wanted to. But there was still that feeling that like this was not something that we wanted to do long term, where she was working and I was kind of doing like just part-time work, making some money but not as much money as we wanted. And so what happened, what really changed the direction of things, is my wife wanted to have another kid. And I remember when we had our first daughter, us having a discussion and being like, and I was like, man, now I understand like what I'm here for, like why I'm here, in the sense of like, I'd had a pretty good life. And, how old was I when my daughter was born? 36. I was 36 before we had our first kid. So I had lived plenty of, I lived a fulfilling life and had my adventures, had plenty of experiences. My wife and I had plenty of experiences together before we had kids. It wasn't like we had a kid when we were 21, right? And I was like, man, now I understand like what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And I see this with a lot of people. A lot of my friends still don't have children. They never had children. And it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? Like, hopefully you really get into something, you get into your work, or you find something you're passionate about. But since I was not that passionate about most things in my life, having a kid really, there was something about it that really resonated with me. It made everything make more sense to me in some way. It made me more empathetic with people. And I was already, empathetic with people. But with people's day-to-day issues, it made me more empathetic at that. Just going to playgrounds and the day-to-day stuff, like seeing how hard the day-to-day stuff can be for a lot of people. I became more aware of that having a kid. But having a second kid, when my wife, made it clear she wanted to have a second kid, I'm like a bum, man. You know what I mean? Like I said, I'm an artist, or whatever you want to call it. Artist sensibility, I should say. Like I like to have my space, my time alone, to do nothing. Very important for me to do nothing, because I'm really not doing nothing. I'm doing a lot when I'm doing nothing. And it's like having a second kid. Holy shit. Like I was like, no, we can't have a second kid. No way. But my wife had brazen impudence. She really wanted a second kid. And it's something we had to work through, and I had to work through. And I have a very good therapist who's right next door to us. She used to be across the street, but we became chummy, and now she's next door to us. But no, we're working with my therapist, talking to my wife, gradually, I came around to the idea of having a second kid. And that was a big decision. And I knew I was going to have to lean into my discomfort probably more than I ever had before in my life. And what then happened is that it was hard to have a second kid. You know, I've mentioned this before. My wife had a miscarriage. It was, it's not good. It was surprising in a way, and it was just, it was not good. And then when she became pregnant again, it was not the easiest of pregnancies. She had preeclampsia. Um, and it was, and before, yeah, while this was happening, my wife left her job at MIT and started working part-time again. And initially when she was, yeah, I mean, she started working part-time again. She's worked part-time ever since. So I, quote unquote, knew, my rational mind knew that I should be focused on, us having more income, me making more income than I had the previous few years. And I had a lot of, I say this so loosely, manifesting knowledge at this point. And I had done a lot of money work on myself, a lot. And I decided, this was also around the same time I discovered Amanda Frances, who's a very good money mindset teacher, in my opinion. And I discovered Genevieve Rackham, who's also a very good money mindset teacher, who, was coached by Amanda, but is more woo-woo. She's more into Abraham Hicks. Anyway, I decided to focus more on my money mindset than ever before, you could say, even though I had focused on it in many ways successfully, because you got to remember, I was passively making money enough to easily get by for years and years. I was like, I got to raise it up a level. Got to raise it up a level, raise up my money mindset, and, lean into my discomfort. So, yeah, I took a lot of courses. I always like taking courses and stuff if I think they're helpful, but like I paid, I would say probably over $10,000 taking courses from like Amanda and Genevieve doing some like group, Genevieve's courses are more like, they're live, like they're on they're like, Facebook, or at least they were. I think they still are. So like you get to interact with her and interact with people. It's not like it's like a press play thing. It's like you're there, right? And they were very helpful in many ways. Those two very, very good money mindset teachers, Amanda and Genevieve. They cleared some stuff up for me. But you can probably tell that's not why I'm making this video. I'm making this video in part to tell you that even with all the work I'd done, taking courses with two of the best manifesting teachers I know of when it comes to money mindset, because I couldn't afford their one-on-one coaching. Very, very expensive. I did not have that kind of money. Even though I was doing all this inner work, right? And also living my life. And I had started my podcast at this point. It's making very good content. My podcast is still my favorite things I've ever done when it comes to this stuff. Even though I was doing all this inner work, right? And leaning into the discomfort. When I looked, and I tried often not to look, but when I looked at my 3D, I couldn't help but notice that it was not changing that much in terms of making more money, for instance. And there was a lot more, you could say, stress in my life in 2022, leading up to my daughter's birth, my second daughter's birth, than I experienced in quite a while, quite frankly. Because like I said, my wife had kind of a rough pregnancy, not terrible, but rough, stress inducing. I was making really good content, and it seemed like externally the 3D was not changing, right? So I tried not to look at it and tried to focus on within. And then our second daughter was born. It was very exciting. And at the same time, what I thought would happen happened. And it's not because I manifested it, it wasn't because it was an assumption. It's just because having two kids, as most of you who are parents can attest, is a lot. If you like having a lot of downtime and time to yourself, and you want to be an involved parent, which I am going to be, and my wife is going to be, it's not something that's negotiable. You don't have a lot of downtime. If you don't send your kids to daycare, which we do not, you're not going to have a lot of downtime. And so the 2 years or so since my second daughter's been born have been some of the, without question, the busiest time of my life. I've never been so busy in my life. And, I mentioned this when I was talking about 10 years of implementing these law of assumption ideas. Like, I'm so grateful for these various, for Coué and also all these new thought teachers teaching me about reactivity and communicating with people in a more, you could say, open, loving, golden rule way. Because I've become a lot more still, or you could say less reactive when it comes to things. And things that used to bother me a lot, that I would have to react to them in the 3D, meaning I'd have to raise my voice or get angry or make a big deal. I've become much better at not reacting to them in the same way, and letting the energy come and let the energy go. And I would say without question, this has been the most challenging 2 years of my life. To be able to just hold it together in terms of to have a happy, healthy family and to financially stay afloat. It's been very challenging for me, because it goes so much against what I've tried to cultivate for most of my life, which is space and time to myself and easygoingness. It's been difficult to cultivate, to actualize that in my life in a consistent manner, with two still rather small children. My older daughter's now 6, two rather young children, and two people who don't like to work many hours. And just to make all the pieces work financially and logistically, it's been really, really difficult for me in many ways. And at the same time, it's made me even more grateful for having discovered these teachings, as I said. And that's the paradox of why I'm making this long video, this seminar about integrating these ideas. Because it ain't gonna be like they fucking tell you in most of these YouTube videos. Excuse my French, but I think most of these people are blowing smoke up your ass. Like I said, I probably spent over 10 grand on good, helpful courses and group coaching with two of the best money mindset teachers I know of. I would never spend that kind of money with anybody in the law of assumption community. And has my income, doubled or tripled because of that? No. Do I feel better about money? Yes. But in the 3D, have I seen gigantic changes? In the 3D, have I seen gigantic changes with my schedule or with stuff just being crazy with having 2 children and trying to, just basically get through the day a lot of the time. No. And I'm implementing these ideas, I would say, because I'm pretty good at judging myself, being honest with myself. It's one of the things I guess you could say I pride myself on. It's one of my strengths. I'm implementing these ideas, integrating these ideas into my life better than I ever have before. And this is my life, I'm fucked up. And this is the thing. It's okay. When I'm stressed, when I feel like I've got a million things to do, I have more skills and more of the ability to be okay with it and be present and be in the moment than ever before. That's what a lot of these law of attraction, law of assumption teachings are pointing at, as well as all of these great spiritual teachings that I try to bring in and connect in some way with the law of attraction. When I do my podcast or these videos or write, or let alone write a book. But it's not glamorous usually. It's not. No, maybe I'm an exception, right? But I really fucking doubt it. You guys have heard me talk about these ideas before. I try to talk about them somewhat sanely and with depth. And if I have trouble as someone who's been into these ideas and takes them, very seriously, if I have trouble integrating them in the way I just described and have success in the way I just described, in other words, in a very gray, muddled way a lot of the time, do you really think most people are doing much better than me? Do you really think that? I hope they are. I hope they are. But I'm skeptical. Quick fixes usually don't work. If you get into these ideas, if you really want to integrate them, it's lifelong work. And stuff changes, right? There's different seasons to your life. When you have young kids, for instance, it tends to be much busier than when you're like retired, right? And in my experiences, it almost always comes back to how you feel on the inside and how you navigate it, because your 3D, the 3D stuff is not necessarily going to change the way people say it's going to change. And there's too much soft marketing where people say, oh, you change on the inside and that's relatively easy and your outside is going to change relatively easily. It's not the case for most of us. If you ever get this far, or get, by this far, I just mean are into these ideas for long enough to experience some of the things I'm talking about. H. Emily Cady, who, I love, one of my favorite law of attraction teachers for sure, there's a great example in her life where like, she was basically, she wrote in, what's it called? I believe it's called, I get it confused with the Goldsmith book, Invisible Supply. She wrote another book, another chapter, something about supply. Anyway, she wrote a great essay, or All Sufficiency in All Things, I believe it's called, All Sufficiency in All Things. One of the greatest law of attraction essays of all time. Talking about how God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, provides us all sufficiency in all things, provides us supply in all things. Right. And that man doesn't have to work, but with the sweat of his brow, but can open up his heart and be supplied for. That's the kind of thing that always deeply resonated with me. That kind of inner supply, right? bringing that out. Anyway, she wrote this essay, one of the best essays ever for this topic. And then for the next 2 years, she a lot of times didn't have enough to eat. She was famished. She was trying to prove this principle, and she could not. And eventually she basically broke down and asked, God, why is this? What can I do? He said, let there be light. And she had an epiphany, and it was clear for her. But it took 2 years of tough processing. And that's one of the best manifesting teachers ever. Joel Goldsmith, one reason I always like him is he always talks about this. He's very sober about it. He goes, if this was easy, everybody would do it, basically. He goes, there can be days where you feel like you're in the depths of hell, but God's there the whole time. And again, this is where we can connect some of those ideas, these very kind of uplifting new thought ideas that are at the same time rather stark, with a lot of Zen ideas or non-dual ideas. That the Buddha nature, that universal energy, that calmness, that peace that passeth understanding is always there, irregardless of the external circumstances. So yeah, maybe I'll do a follow-up video about this, but I wanted to share some of my stories. Oh yeah, I forgot to. This is interesting to mention. This past, I guess spring, financially, things were so muddled that my wife was like, maybe you should think about getting some kind of part-time job or something. And I was like, that terrified me, right? Terrified me. And I looked at it. I was like, why is this scaring me so much, right? And it's like, well, because it's against everything I've ever stood for and why I got into these ideas. And I viewed myself as a failure for having maybe having to get a part-time job, right? And so I sat with it, for weeks, if not months, met with my therapist about it, did IFS about it. And what ended up happening is I ended out one day, or I decided, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll go to my old real estate office. I haven't seen those guys in a couple of years. Hadn't worked there really in 10 years. I had sold a property that I had owned, but I hadn't really done any real estate work in basically a decade. I walked in and saw those guys who I'm very close with. And it's like nothing had changed, right? Literally, my name was still on the chalkboard. We have a chalkboard in the back, and the names from 10, 12, 15 years ago were still on there. And I was like, if I want to work some this spring and summer, can I? And everybody's like, yeah, of course. And so I ended out for the first time in a decade doing a job that I quote unquote didn't want to do, a little bit part-time. But in the summer, especially when you're doing rental type of real estate in the Boston area, it's very busy. So part-time can still look like 20, 25 hours a week very, very quickly. So I did that for a few months. It's winding down now, as well as coaching people, as well as doing these videos and, my regular, very busy domestic life. I was literally the busiest I've probably ever been, I would say, in maybe June or July. And this is the thing, when I got back to doing real estate part-time in this way, it was like Murphy always says, you open the door to see if the boogeyman's there, and the boogeyman's not there. There was nothing to it. I actually enjoyed showing apartments and doing real estate stuff than a lot of the coaching stuff I've had to deal with over the last couple of years in terms of finicky clients. Not clients that I actually get to work with and sit down with via Zoom and get into a session or do multiple sessions with, but the kind of clients that say they're going to show up and then don't show up, or say they're going to commit to something and don't commit to something. Real estate's not like that. Either you take it or you don't take it. And I appreciate that, because that's how I am as not only a realtor, but also as a coach. I try to provide value, and I expect people to understand that and want to work with me in return, right? The golden rule. There's a lot of confusion in the manifesting community, the coaching community involving with manifestation about that. There's a lot of bullshit. There's a lot of people who say one thing and mean something else. I dislike that. And that's why I'm so against coaches over promising, because most of them do. And I know most of them are going to underdeliver. And I say that because I've seen some of the best coaches in not the law of assumption space, the manifesting space in general, like the two I just mentioned that I paid a considerable amount of money to, as good as they were, they, I think, are over promising and under delivering for most of their clients, at least the people who are not their one-on-one clients. And they're some of the best. So yeah, I started doing real estate some part-time. And it was one of the things that really encouraged me to do it was Goldsmith, just, reading Goldsmith, meditating on Goldsmith, him saying, just do what you have to do today. And that helped me a lot. This is a very good video, very good seminar. I hope some of you understand what I'm talking about. This is the real shit. I've seen Maggie make videos kind of like this. I really haven't seen anybody else in the space do a video like this that I can think of off the top of my head. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Any questions, or if you want real coaching where I will not overpromise and underdeliver, but actually do my best to, do what I can do to help you. I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com. Until next time.